Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Jim Langevin.
Good, how are you?
Sorry that we didn't get to chat a little bit before, but thank you.
That's okay.
You had some votes.
We did. Yeah, we're trying to protect net neutrality. So that was our big vote today.
You had to be there.
So we did.
There was a round of applause I think we just squelched.
Yeah,
If you want to
yeah,
go ahead and clap for that, go ahead. Congressman Langevin, can I call you Jim through the
Sure,
process?
please.
Thanks very much. Is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the subcommittee that deals with cybersecurity and infrastructure protection, and also many other subcommittee works, but those are the ones that are going to be relevant here today. I just want to mention, Jim, in looking back, I was looking back at some of the things that you've said on this topic in the past. It leapt out at me that at a conference in January 2019, only 3 months ago, you were discussing supply chain security, and you called it one of those things that keeps me up late at night. Then I found in October, 7 months ago, you were talking with Cyberscoop, and they were asking about the possibility of a Cyber 9/11, and you said, it's a remote possibility, but it's one of those things that keeps me up late at night. And in December 23rd of 2014, you told the Providence Journal, your home state newspaper, again talking about a Cyber 9/11, hope it never happens, but it's something that keeps me up late at night.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't sleep very well at night.
Yeah, that's where I'm getting. I'm going back, I found about 9 more going back to April 27th, 2009, 10 years ago in 2 weeks. Told the National Journal, I hope the country never faces a Cyber 9/11, but that is certainly something that keeps me up late at night. Is this metaphorical, or are you actually never sleeping? You haven't slept in a decade.
It's a little bit of both. I definitely used to sleep a lot better before I had this job, and I guess they say some of it's a function of getting older. I guess we don't sleep as well. And the other thing is there's a lot of challenges on our plate, and I've dealt with national security issues now for the near 20 years that I've been in Congress. I was originally appointed to the House Armed Services Committee as a freshman, and I've been on that committee ever since. I did 8 years on the House Select Committee on Intelligence, and then I was a founding member of the Homeland Security Committee, and so I've been on that since it was created after
So
9/11.
you came into Congress in the year of just ahead of 9/11 and right after year Y2K.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, at that point, what did you seek this portfolio basically to be looking at cybersecurity?
No, I did not actually. Ironically, I don't have technical training by background. I was a political science, public administration major with a minor in economics, and I have a master's in public administration, and so certainly policy is where I focus my attention generally. I kind of fell into the area of cybersecurity when I was chairing the subcommittee on Homeland Security that had jurisdiction over this issue. And the title of the subcommittee back then was Emerging Threats, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats to the country, cybersecurity, and science and technology. And I thought we'd spend most of our time on the WMD issues, which we did, until I got briefed one day by these two scientists out at Idaho National Labs that had found a vulnerability to our electric grid that would allow hackers or bad actors to remotely cause a generator to blow itself up, or potentially to shut down a whole area of the sector of the electric grid.
You had not conceived of that possibility before. That was sort of a...
Not really. I mean, I think maybe I've heard about those things, but never really did a deep dive. These researchers actually showed me how it could be done, and it was an eye-opener. And what was an even more of an eye-opener, where I realized that Congress needed to do more of a deep dive on the cybersecurity issue, is kind of a collective shrug of the owners and operators of the electric grid at the time that said, yeah, well, maybe it could happen, but we think we're okay. Turns out they weren't.
What do you think they were thinking at the time? In the panel ahead, we were discussing whether private enterprise, the private sector doesn't really like to have conversations with government about stuff going on inside their walls. Do you think it was that, or do you think they actually thought they were okay?
Both a little bit, and they also felt that they did have a level of security that felt was sufficient, and it was more of to do more costs more. If that's going to happen, then we want the government or somebody else to pay for it, but not us. And the reality is this is where government has a role to play, where we have oversight, and these issues, these sectors, these are important for public safety, for the security and resilience of the economy. And I say, look, the best intentions of the world aren't going to get us to the level of security or safety that we need to be. Just by way of example, think of the airline industry. We have the safest airline industry in the world because certainly of the desire of the airline executives and the airlines themselves of wanting to get their passengers safely from point A to point B, but that only gets you so far, right? And you have the FAA and the NTSB to get you that much further down the field that gets us to the safest airline industry in the world. And same thing with other areas of protecting us in the area of critical infrastructure and making sure that those critical sectors are secure. I believe the government has a role to play. I'd like to see us be more proactive, but we've come a long ways from where we were.
As of a couple of months ago, the then new session of Congress almost immediately had 30 bills from the House proposed that touched directly on cybersecurity. The Senate had 7. Does that tell us that the legislative branches are on top of this issue, or does it tell us that they're all over the place on the issue?
So there's definitely a greater level of awareness on cybersecurity. And the question is what to do in terms of what more do we need to do to have us be more secure. That's maybe less clear for a lot of members, and that everybody has their own areas of expertise. Mine happens to be in the area of cyber, but you have 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. Again, everyone has different areas of interest and expertise. So not everyone is as focused on this as I would like, but again, the awareness has come a long way. There's a handful of us in Congress that understand the challenges in cyber, and I have some great bipartisan partners that I work with. Mike McCall, who was my ranking member when I chaired the subcommittee on Homeland, who later chaired the full Homeland Security Committee. Dutch Ruppersberger from Maryland, he's an appropriator on the House Appropriations Committee. So we get this, but there's not enough that are focusing on this issue. But the real challenge is the jurisdictional battles or issue of who has what jurisdiction over this issue. So my frustration is, on a process side, is that you have some 80 to 100 different committees and subcommittees that have some kind of jurisdiction on cyber.
You're not talking about agencies. You're talking just within the legislature and committees?
Within the Congress itself. So it makes it challenging. To move with agility. We can't move with the agility that we need to better protect the country in cyberspace. Perfect case in point. One of the best things that we can do to inoculate ourselves and the private sector from cyber vulnerabilities is information sharing. It's like if you know that there's one area, one business is getting hit here, and we can share that information at network speed about what that vulnerability is, how to fix it, we'd be much more secure. It took 6 years to get that cyber information sharing bill through the Congress.
What was the resistance?
It's just how to get it done. What's best to who should coordinate the information sharing? How should it be done? Should it be mandatory? Is it voluntary? It ultimately turned out to be that it was voluntary information sharing, also protecting privacy and civil liberties. What is going to be shared? So all these different components, and had it been 1, 2, or maybe 3 major committees, it would have moved with greater agility. But there were different subcommittees and committees that all had it's a piece of it. Just by way of example, look how hard it was to do healthcare reform, and it really didn't happen until the speaker stepped in and said, "Okay, these 3 committees are going to have primary jurisdiction. That's it. You'll hold your hearings. We're going to do it within a compressed time frame." And finally, it was a Herculean effort to push that through with the support of the and the focus of the president and also the majority leader in the Senate at the time. So all the kind of the planets lined up there. We pushed a major piece of legislation forward. It doesn't always happen where you have that kind of focus on any particular bill, and certainly that's one of the challenges with the cyber issues, that we need more focus and streamlined Congress to.
I mean, is there an obvious solution to that fracturing of attention and jurisdiction?
Yeah, and there is a working group right now looking at issues of how to modernize Congress. I certainly would like them to look at cyber, and I've talked to the Speaker about this and the need to streamline oversight so that we can move with greater agility. I mean, Congress has an oversight role, and we have to perform that function responsibly. But having it so diffuse is something that we need to work on.
Speaking of oversight role, you held a hearing recently and had a person representing the White House DSA, I believe, and you were trying to find out the number of specialists. Tell me about that, because the outcome is quite surprising.
Yeah. So looking at how there are the sector-specific coordinating agencies, it's a public-private partnership. The private sector doing its role in cyber, and then working with the government to have greater coordination on cybersecurity. And so the TSA was the sector-specific agency that's responsible for working with the surface transportation areas, so rail and shipping and such. And so I asked the question of, okay, so how many specific cybersecurity trained people do you have working for you in this area that actually then coordinates with the private sector? And the answer was surprising, the answer was zero. Well, that doesn't inspire confidence that that TSA and working with their private sector partners is organized, prepared, and staffed to the level that it needs to be.
And what do you put that down to?
Well, part of it is an area of priorities and how they're organized. Their answer was that they'll draw on other areas of expertise, but someone with general cybersecurity expertise may not be as proficient at, say, pipeline security, if you will, or shipping security. So having someone with the right cyber expertise that understands the specific sector is essential. And again, the answer here was zero.
So I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but not enough people who can't get to sleep at night. It sounds like there's just, when you say priority, maybe that folks just aren't scared enough.
That could be it. But we also have very dedicated people at Department of Homeland Security, and Chris Krebs is the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Agency at DHS, and I have frequent contact with him. And he's had Jeanette Manfor here, and I'm grateful for the work that she's doing. So we are making progress. It just needs to get better, and the right organization, the right resources. And for example, DHS right now has responsibility for being the department or agency that has jurisdiction over protecting the .gov networks here for the federal government, and yet they draw a lot from other resources, say from NSA or Cyber Command. They really need to have more support for building up their own cyber expertise. They also have jurisdiction over, again, protecting the .gov network, but no one at Homeland Security, including the Secretary, has actually policy and budgetary authority where the Secretary could reach across departments and agencies and say, you need to do more on closing cyber vulnerabilities, and say the Department of Treasury or Department of Commerce. That's really left to the Cabinet Secretary there to actually execute closing the vulnerabilities that are pointed out to them.
Has the whole period of the Russian hacking at least helped to energize concern in a broader way?
Not enough.
Yeah.
So certainly when the hackings first occurred and the Russians had hacked into the DNC networks and stole the emails. I didn't even, although I was paying attention to that, I don't think anybody really anticipated, I certainly didn't anticipate, the whole of government focused cyber attack, if you will, on our election system as a whole. And we have certainly are aware now, we've taken more steps to protect us as a whole of government response going forward. We were much more prepared in 2018 than we were in 2016. But that's going to be an ongoing focus, and we've kind of made a down payment in providing more resources to states to strengthen their resilience and both their equipment and their voter registration systems. But states can't do this on their own, and they do need federal support. The elections will always and should always be in the hands of state and local governments to implement and to carry out. As a former Secretary of State, I would take that responsibility very seriously. And if you have secretaries of state or election officials that take it seriously, they will be far more attuned and better off, and they're making progress in closing vulnerabilities. But they can't be expected to defend against a nation-state attack like the whole of government approach that Russia has had, and we need to push back hard. We're getting better, but I'm not thrilled that the administration hasn't been more proactive at calling out the Russians and going at them. But I will say that, and again, the president really needs to step up there more, and he is not. But I will say that, again, we were going into the 2018 elections. We did have a better whole of government approach toward being prepared and pushing back against the Russians, and we need to see that as an ongoing effort.
The fact that there has been no cyber 9/11 since the time you first started talking about it, that's a metric of anything meaningful? For example, does it mean we've been lucky? Does it mean we're doing a good job of defending? What does it actually add up to, and what would be a cyber 9/11?
So it is, part luck, but also we're doing a lot, and I will say, I put it this way, and I've said this often, that right now the worst cyber weapons are in the hands mainly of nation states that have the weapons but not necessarily the will to use them. But then you add bad actors that certainly have the will to use the worst weapons, but not the weapons themselves yet. And I've often said that, how long is it before that divide is bridged in some way? So we need to be vigilant and continue to develop our capabilities, and we do have significant capabilities. And firstly, the creation of U.S. Cyber Command, standing up that entity is important. The work that we're doing in protecting the .gov networks, but still in the area of critical infrastructure is where the greatest damage can be done, and that's an ongoing effort. And some sectors are better than others. I'd say that among the best are protecting our financial system and our electric grid. They're probably most aware and have done the most. Probably the best is the
Because this is the same electric industry that years ago was not taking it seriously, has completely done a 180 on that?
They've done better, and a lot. Yeah. I would say a lot better. Now, some of it, it's not that they don't get hacked, and they're not attempts to mess with our electric grid, and it's not that they're not happening. They are, probably to the tune of millions of attacks a day of cyber intrusions. But I do wonder at some point, does the bad thing happen? And for that, we need to be.
What would be the bad thing? How extensive?
So, from what I had been concerned about years ago, whether it's somebody's shutting down our financial system, somebody's shutting down the electric grid. You can think of in the dead of winter, if a whole number of power generation facilities were shut down, you had this cascading blackout in the dead of winter. And if it wasn't just a the networks going down, but actually causing physical damage by blowing up power generation capabilities. That would worry me, because those things you can't just reconstitute. They're not like batteries that are sitting on a shelf. You can pop one out and put a new one in. It's these generators, these turbines, take months to build, ship, and install. And so again, these are things that we have to be aware that they could happen. And the more proactive we are at closing off vulnerabilities and managing our risk, you're never going to get to a place where we're 100% secure. So I often say it's not about making us 100% secure. It's about managing our risk and buying down that risk and making that aperture of vulnerability as small as possible. And again, that comes with cyber awareness. It comes being good cyber hygiene. It comes with good cyber tools on your equipment to identify bad actors and things that are occurring on your networks that are anomalies that you can identify quickly and close those off. The bad actors are going to get in too. You have to do, again, it's not about, you're not going to be able to keep everybody out, but being able to monitor your networks and making sure that that CISOs are and systems are responding effectively, so you catch the bad things before they get worse.
We might have time for one or two questions. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to bring up?
Eric Lieberman of the Daily Caller. I was wondering your opinion on decentralization and single source and multi-source contracts when it comes to the DoD, as I'm sure you've worked on issues like that.
For what particular thing?
For the DoD was transferring their data. They were choosing whether it was one company or multiple companies. What are the merits of a single source contract or a multi-source contract?
And that's what's being debated right now. It certainly there's a role to play for multiple players in this space. We're looking at, and the DoD, and I have great confidence in Dana Deasy, the new Pentagon CIO, and trying to modernize our networks. And in some ways, it's going to make sense, I suppose, to further sole source contract. In other ways, it might make more sense for a multi-contract approach. So I'm not going to, without giving a specific example, it's hard to say whether it should be sole source or not. But some companies, what I would not want to do, and this is why I'm reluctant to always go sole source, is that innovation happens a lot of times at smaller companies, and we don't want to choke off that innovation and just go with the big guys all the time. But it has to make both a business case, has to be cost effective, and we have to allow for innovation.
Another question here.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Dave Levin from the University of Maryland. Just following off that last point you made of making a good business case, what some of my fellow colleagues and I do is we measure, where does security break down? Why does it break down? And more often than not, it comes down to the fact that the incentives aren't aligned. So sometimes it's that folks don't know what to do. Other times they know exactly what to do, but there isn't a good business case for it. So I'm wondering, what can we do to help better align the incentives to actually employ some of the technical solutions that we've developed that we know that work? How can we align those incentives?
So I would say that, number one, metrics are important, and I don't always know that there's a clear understanding of what works best and what doesn't. We have things like the NIST framework that was developed. They say, if we adopt the NIST framework, companies adopt the NIST framework, that we're going to get to a much better level of cybersecurity. And I agree with that, but I don't quite know that. How do we know what's working best of those of the framework recommendations? And so I still want to see an entity do metrics so that we know, or CEOs or CISOs can actually make the case, say the board or the CISO to the CEO, this is where you should spend your next cybersecurity dollar. Incentives also, though, more broadly to your question, are important, and I'm always open to the idea of incentives, tax credits, et cetera, that will encourage businesses to invest more in cyber. We also, by the way, the insurance industry is playing a role in this area now too, and that they offer cybersecurity products or protections. But again, there's incentives there, and the insurance companies are getting better at assessing risk and what works best. And so they'll be able to say to a company, look, you need to do X, Y, and Z. If you do that, this is going to be the cost for your cybersecurity insurance. If you don't do those things, then it's going to be a higher.
Before we wrap up, I just want to bring to your attention the Washington Post story this morning, in fact, that reports that among cybersecurity experts in the United States, only 11% are women, compared to 24% globally. And part of the problem, it says, is that these women are actually better educated than most of the men, so there's like a missed opportunity there. And you also have this vision of, in fact, I think you have legislation proposing the idea of funding a way to educate sort of, Joe Sixpack, whatever job a person might be in, to be more cyber literate. So talk about that whole notion of getting more people up to speed, more women, and more people going into the field overall.
Yeah, so there are vast needs in the area of cybersecurity, trained experts to go into this field. And certainly this is an area that women are underrepresented, and we need to encourage more growth in that area. I believe that it starts, by the way, in our education system, all the way from K through 12. Colleges, universities are now creating cybersecurity programs, started with certificate programs now, then master's programs. Now it's going into undergraduate degrees in cybersecurity being developed. So there's still a lag between what businesses need, what our country needs, and what we're teaching in schools. But we need to push that down even further in K through 12. So there's great programs like Cyber Patriot program, by the way, that's sort of extracurricular, but it's an opportunity for young people to get more involved in those areas, and we need to encourage more girls to go into that area as well. And I think the best thing we can do, by the way, is having women leaders in this area that have their credentials, have jobs in cybersecurity, serve as role models and mentors for young girls and women, to say that's a field that I can and should go into as well. But we are thoroughly under-resourced when it comes to, I'd say there's probably some 300,000 jobs right now in the country in cybersecurity that go unfilled right now. That number is going to continue to grow as the needs in cyber continue to grow. There are programs that encourage people to go into this field. The Cyber Core program, it's a joint program between NSF and the Department of Homeland Security. It's a scholarship for a service program, and for those students that are accepted, they will their college will be paid for in their junior and senior year, and they'll get a stipend of $22,500 each year. And then when they graduate, they agree to go into a cybersecurity job at local, state, or the federal government. We need more of those types of programs, and also looking at how we can incentivize people, the kids in high school, to start thinking of so more scholarship programs for when they graduate from college, from high school, that they go into these fields early on.
Well, you're in front of a room full of people here who are in the field and who I think would love to chat with you when we wrap. And that's right now, because we're out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much to Congressman Langevin. Thanks, Congressman.